The humans offered him terms, real terms, passage to any neutral port, safety guarantees, even access to medical facilities, though he required none. When Thorne asked why they would show mercy to a pirate, to someone who had spent a lifetime causing exactly the kind of suffering these humans fought against, the human captain sat across from him and said something that would echo through Thorne's mind for the rest of his life. "Because," she said, "this ends now, not tomorrow, not after we get our revenge, not after the galaxy learns a lesson. Now, we break the cycle or we become what we fight. There's no third option." Thorne was released at the nearest neutral station. He could have returned to Piracy. The galaxy's laws were weak, the consequences minimal. Instead, he did something that sent shockwaves through every government in charted space. He filed a statement with the Galactic Merchant Authority, a complete confession of 40 years of piracy. Names, locations, coordinates, everything. The authority didn't know what to do. Piracy wasn't a crime they pursued. It wasn't supposed to be prosecuted. It was an accepted variable in the galactic economy. But humans had changed something fundamental. They had made it personal. Within a solar cycle, the Corvin Collective faced its first criminal trial for piracy. The ZYX Empire suddenly felt pressure it had never experienced. Trade routes that had been preyed upon for centuries suddenly had protectors, human protectors, who would sacrifice everything to ensure the safety of their convoys. For the first time in 800 years, piracy became something that mattered, something that had consequences, and the galaxy began to understand why. A researcher named Dr. Vexthala, a Corvin academic, decided to study this phenomenon. What biological imperative drove these humans to respond to threats with sacrifice? What logical framework supported their willingness to lose everything rather than accept loss? She interviewed human merchants. She reviewed their psychological profiles. She analyzed their decision-making patterns. And she discovered something that would reshape her understanding of sentience itself. "They don't calculate optimal outcomes," Dr. Vexthala reported to the Corvin Council. "They calculate what is right. These are not the same thing. Humans will consistently choose the harder path, the more costly path, if they believe it upholds a principle. They will sacrifice their own welfare for an abstract concept." "That's inefficient," a council member observed. "Yes," Dr. Vexthala agreed, "profoundly so, and yet, it works, because principles create trust, and trust creates societies that function at depths we haven't measured. The humans don't fight piracy because it's profitable to do so. They fight it because they believe it's wrong. And that belief, that pure, uncompromising belief, has accomplished in 3 years what 8 centuries of accepted inevitability could not." She paused, her voice quieting to barely a whisper. "They have made the galaxy better, not for strategic advantage, not for material gain, simply because they believed it was possible." Within 5 years, piracy in charted space had declined by 91%. New security protocols were established. New laws took root. The Velthian Council reorganized itself around the concept of accountability. The Corvin Collective disbanded its traditional insurance model entirely, replacing it with active defense initiatives. And the Human Trade Collective, despite having initially been regarded as impractical idealists, became one of the most respected organizations in the galaxy. But perhaps the most profound change was far subtler. When the merchant ships of 1,000 different species gathered in the grand trading stations, something new existed between them. The understanding that sacrifice for principle was not weakness, but the foundation of genuine strength. A ZYX trader once asked a human captain why she had risked so much for such an abstract ideal. The human smiled and said, "Because if we don't stand for something, we'll fall for anything. My grandmother taught me that. I think maybe all sentient beings need someone to teach them that." The ZYX theory had no response. The galaxy had been shaped by 800 years of acceptance. It took humans, newcomers, outsiders, those who didn't know that some things couldn't be changed, to remind the established powers that transformation was always possible. That even the deepest patterns could be rewritten. That even in the vast emptiness of space, a single principle held firmly enough by enough beings who believed could alter everything. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human. Not the biological definition, not the technological achievements or the numerical population, but the essential quality, the willingness to believe that things could be better, and the courage to sacrifice everything to make that belief real. 800 years of piracy ended not with weapons or laws or enforcement. It ended with conviction. It ended with humans who said no and meant it absolutely. It ended the way most real change does, with ordinary people doing extraordinary things not for recognition, but because they believed in something worth more than safety, more than profit, more than comfort. In the end, the galaxy didn't learn about humanity from textbooks or genetic analyses or strategic assessments. It learned about humanity from watching humans stand for what was right, and realizing, perhaps for the first time, that such a thing was possible. If the story moved you, if it stirred something within you about the power of principle and human conviction, please subscribe for more tales from the stars. More stories about humanity's place in the cosmos. More reminders that sometimes the most extraordinary thing we can do is simply refuse to accept what everyone else has given up on. Because the galaxy is watching, and it's beginning to understand. We are human, and that means something. When investigators asked her why she destroyed perfectly salvageable cargo worth 2 million credits, Captain Sarah Chan had shrugged. Because it was mine, she'd said simply, and I didn't want them to have it. The galactic community began to notice. Insurance companies raised premiums on human-operated vessels. High-risk behavior, they called it. Irrational threat response patterns. But the pirate networks started avoiding human ships entirely. And then something even more unusual happened. Humans began organizing. It started with a small group. Human traders, human captains, human merchants, they formed an alliance. Not for profit, not for territorial expansion, but specifically to protect each other from piracy. They called it simply the Human Trade Collective. Within months, it had grown to 17 vessels. Within a year to 60. Within 3 years to over 200 ships, all human-operated, all committed to a single principle that had never taken root in the galaxy before. Piracy would not be tolerated. They didn't have the firepower of the Corvan Navy. They didn't have the resources of the ZYX Empire. What they had was something far stranger to the established powers. They had conviction. When merchants from the Human Trade Collective traveled, they traveled together. When a pirate attack occurred, every available human ship diverted to help. They didn't board enemy vessels. They didn't demand retaliation. They simply responded. Immediately, completely, without calculation. And when raids were thwarted, the humans did something that horrified the accounting departments of every major galactic power. They refused to claim insurance. Captain Thorne was a Velthian commander, a species known for their logical approach to commerce and their complete lack of emotional complexity. He had overseen pirate operations for 40 years. It was profitable, it was accepted, and it was the way of the galaxy. He had never questioned it. Until the day his pirate squadron intercepted a human vessel that wasn't running alone. Captain Thorne had made a critical error. The Galileo's Hope was a bait ship, and the Human Trade Collective had been waiting. What happened next would alter Thorne's understanding of everything. The human ships could have destroyed his vessel. They had superior positioning. They had numbers. Their weapons, though modest, were sufficient. Thorne prepared for the end of his life, already calculating the pension his estate might receive. Instead, a human captain opened a communication channel. "Stand down." The voice was calm, female. "You're outgunned. You're surrounded. You have 30 seconds to surrender before we engage." Thorne complied. It was the logical choice. But then, in the holding cells of the human flagship, something occurred that Thorne could not reconcile with 8 centuries of galactic culture. For 800 years, piracy had been a constant fact of galactic life. Not a problem to be solved. Not a crime demanding justice. Simply an accepted cost of doing business among the stars. The great trading confederacies, the merchant fleets of the Corvan Collective, the transport networks of the ZYX Empire, they all budgeted for losses. 10% here, 15% there. A ship lost to raiders was merely a line item on a quarterly report. The insurance payout covered it. Life went on. The Velthian Council had tried to establish patrol forces once. 3 centuries ago. The effort lasted exactly 47 days before the expense became impossible to justify. Why spend trillions on security when the victims could simply absorb the loss? It was mathematics, pure and simple. Elegant, even. The Corvin admirals understood this. The ZYX-Theory bureaucrats accepted it. Even the merchant princes of the Centauri Trade Federation had long since resigned themselves to the inevitability of cosmic theft. Piracy was simply the way of things. And then humanity entered the galactic market. At first, the established powers paid them little mind. Humans were new to the stars, fresh from a singular rocky world called Earth. Primitive, yes. Aggressive in their own small way, certainly. But they followed the rules of commerce. They filed the proper paperwork. They paid their dock fees. What they failed to do was accept piracy. The first incident occurred on a standard trade route near the Helix Nebula. A human merchant vessel, the Excelsior's Pride, a modest cargo transport, was intercepted by Velthian raiders. The standard procedure was well established. Shut down the engines, transfer the cargo, depart within the hour. The insurance would handle everything. Except the humans did something unexpected. They fought. Not with weapons, their ship was barely equipped for combat. Instead, they damaged their own cargo deliberately. They ejected containers into the void. They triggered chemical reactions in the hold, contaminating goods worth millions. They made the theft so costly that the raiders abandoned the attempt in frustration. The Admiralty found it baffling. They destroyed their own wealth, the Corvin commander said, reviewing the incident report. For what purpose? The loss was absolute. But the humans had filed a claim. And because they had damaged the cargo themselves to prevent its theft, the insurance company, reviewing the evidence carefully, had paid out less than if the cargo had been stolen. The humans had accepted a smaller loss to deny the pirates any gain whatsoever. It was inefficient by galactic standards. It was counterintuitive. It made no sense. It was the first sign of something the established powers had never encountered before. The second incident followed within weeks, then a third, then 5 more in rapid succession. Every human vessel attacked by pirates responded the same way. Some fought back with improvised weapons. Others signaled other human ships in the area, forming convoys, sharing risks, accepting collective damage rather than individual theft. One captain even turned his ship toward an asteroid field and deliberately crashed into it, losing everything, but preventing the raiders from claiming a single container.